I'm Sherae, and I'm here today with Enact Equality and Black Things UK. I'm interviewing the newly appointed Windrush Commissioner, Reverend Clive Foster, so we can hear a little bit more about his background, his new position, and how his upbringing in Nottingham has led to his journey here today. I wondered if we could start off by exploring a little bit more about your background and your journey, and essentially how you plan to advocate for Windrush communities during your 3-year term. So can you tell us a little bit about your background and your upbringing in Nottingham?
Sure. Well, I was actually born in Birmingham.
Oh, really?
But made in Nottingham.
Okay,
so
great.
I left Nottingham when I was about 7. My parents are from Jamaica. I got 5 brothers and 1 sister. I grew up from a working class background. I went to a comprehensive school, then went on to college and then went on to university. Had ambitions to become a chemist. But I wasn't very good at being a chemist. And so I went into computing and did a career like that. But I was always passionate about social justice and inequality. And that was because I saw, with my own brothers and even my own personal experience, inequality, race riots that was happening. And so that was always in my mind. I came to faith as a Christian, and that also was very important for me. And it was that background of social injustice and inequality that brought me into a position where I felt, I want to be doing something a bit more broader. So I got myself involved in doing things in community work, hate crime, and then find myself many years on now as the Windrush Commissioner.
Incredible. And it's interesting that you're saying this because, I'm from Nottingham as well, if you can't already hear by my accent.
Yeah.
And it was my great-grandparents who came to the UK, to Nottingham specifically, from St. Kitts during the Windrush period. So this is an issue that is super close to my heart and obviously close to the heart of so many people across the UK, especially our audiences as well online. And I guess one of the first questions that I think a lot of people would like to know is what your immediate priorities are during your 3-year term in this role.
Sure, that's a really important question. So there's probably 4 things I'm going to be really focusing on.
Yeah.
Number 1 is to make sure that the compensation scheme that is now in place is fair and it's fast and it's working for the people that it said it's there for. So that's one thing. The other thing will be around status and entitlement. It's really important that people understand that the reason why we had the Windrush Scandal is because people were undocumented and wrongly could not get that sorted out. So I want to be making sure that the people who are entitled to status get the status. The other thing is to make sure that this scandal never happens again, so that there are no future injustices with regards to this. It's really important that there has been lots of reports around this, but we've got to have that, as it were, complete change a cultural change within the system. And lastly, what's going to be really important is that the people who have been affected, that there is the adequate support to help them as the survivors and the victims of this scandal. So those are going to be my priorities and my focus going forward.
So as we're talking about survivors, as I'm sure you're aware, survivors have said that, the Home Office is waiting for them to die. How do you plan to rebuild trust between the survivors, especially those that have health vulnerabilities and are from an older generation?
That's a really important question. I'm really pleased you've asked that. And because you're quite right in that a large majority of the people who were affected are now quite senior.
Yeah.
And I have actually raised this issue with the Home Office. I've written a letter to the Minister, because one of the things that I've identified coming into this role, is that there are people who, sadly, age is not on their side. Time is not with them. Secondly, as well, it's also around their health condition. So one of the things that we have recommended, I've become aware that in the actual, as it were, the management of cases when they come in, sometimes these factors in terms of age and the actual health conditions are not considered. And they could be particularly vulnerable if those cases are not looked at straight away. Sadly, we do know that 66 people who have sadly passed away who should have got compensation. So this is a big concern for me, and it is something that I have already written to the Minister and addressed, and I'll be looking to work with ongoing campaigners about raising this issue in our wider community as well.
And have you received a response from the minister as of yet?
So you may be aware, only recently there's been a change of minister. So that letter has actually gone out to Minister Malhotra.
Okay.
And as a result of the change of minister, we're going to be having a meeting with the new minister around that. I've only met the new minister very briefly, okay. But it is something that is in his tray, and I'm looking forward to sort of putting that case in terms of how we can change that. The great thing in my role as well is that I have the ability to meet with other parts of the Home Office, like the parts of the Windrush compensation team, and can convey this message as well, meeting with other parts of the Home Office that are involved in this, like the adjudicator's office. So making the point there as well. And so hopefully by the time we get to meet with the minister, you know, it's gone round in certain areas of the Home Office as well.
Are you optimistic about the response that you might get from the minister?
So let me take that question in a more broader sense than tackling that one specifically. I came into this role because I saw that there was a need for change. And I am optimistic, if you want to use that word, I'm optimistic to make the observations and to challenge and to scrutinize. I want to say that my role is independent. I am not a politician. I was appointed, and one of the briefs of my role is to actually scrutinize and to challenge and advise around the effectiveness or not of making things better for those people who've been subject to the Home Office Windrush Scandal. So I give that answer in response to a broader intent, because I think we can get bogged down on certain things which may take a bit more time, maybe a bit more difficult, but I am definitely committed to conveying, you know, the voices of the victims and the communities that have been impacted.
And even you mentioning, you know, the voices of the victims, I guess advocacy is also like a fundamental aspect of this role, right? Ensuring that you are fighting on behalf of our communities going forward. And we know that we've seen a few comments that you've made in the press about pushing the Home Office to implement trauma-informed reforms and partial payments for those awaiting reviews. Do you think we're close to seeing any of that rolled out in practice?
Well, I have written to the minister about this, as I referenced earlier, so that's really important. I have got meetings lined up potentially in the near future with the minister. So I think what we've got to do is, and I think you're right to ask this question, it's really important, is that we convey what is happening now and what is not working now for people. I am currently on a bit of a UK tour. So I've been to Scotland, been to Wales, did my launch in London, looking to go to Northern Ireland. Something that I'm seeing come back consistently is the way people feel traumatized, re-traumatized in entering into the process for compensation. And so something that we've identified, and it's a common thing that people have been saying, is the need and the necessity to be more trauma-informed, culturally appropriate in terms of the response and support. So this is also another one of those priorities, and I'm very much looking forward to sort of having the conversations not only with the ministers but to getting a response from the Home Office as well. We have spoke to wider elements of the Home Office, and they are aware of this now and listening, and so now it's about how we can understand what changes can be done.
And what do trauma-informed reforms mean?
Yeah, so I think one of the things we've got to recognise is that for some people, when they again rehearse the pain, emotional pain that they've suffered, and we cannot look. This is about restoring the losses that people have done. There's a very practical aspect to this, from in terms of those kind of losses, in terms of financial losses, being wrongly deported, wrongly detained, and losing your job and trying to get those losses. But it's the emotional pain, the psychological pain that's coupled with. And we cannot escape that mixed in with that is the racial part of that.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, we've got to remember that we were talking about our, parents and grandparents and generation when they came over. You know what? When I think about my parents in that generation, in some ways they were more British than British. They had an affection for for England, because when they were in the Caribbean, particularly from the African Caribbean community, they were associated with a British way of living. So when they came to this country, the mother country, there was an expectation of being treated like a British citizen. And so the sense of betrayal and the sense of being turned away is very deep. And I think that the psychological component of that and the cultural awareness of the racial undertones around that need to be recognized, and then need to look at what kind of solutions can be applied to manage that.
Very, very true point. And I think even trying to quantify the psychological impact must be near enough impossible. And that's why it definitely is really pertinent, I guess, that you have advocated for trauma-informed reforms. But we also know that there's been a lot of research that has shown that legal representation drastically improves compensation outcomes. And I therefore wonder, do you plan on advocating for access to legal aid?
That's another important point. I am actually actively carrying out a review of what legal aid will look like.
Okay.
So I'm looking at that at the moment, because you're probably referring to the Justice Report that came out in June, and there was a really some kind of a clear evidential things around that. People who didn't get any legal support average pay $11,500. Those who got legal support over $80,000. So there's some compelling cases. I have to say that I was involved very much from the beginning around supporting people from the Windrush generation. And when the scandal first broke, I had to get an immigration advisor sitting alongside me, or with other advocates as well, to help navigate. So I am currently reviewing that what legal aid looks like, because even in the Justice Report, it talks about promoting legal aid and or something similar. And I know we've recently, I know that the Home Office, has recently launched the Advocacy Support Fund. So 1.5 million in terms of advocates. And so we're looking at what are some of the options in terms of what that support can look like.
And I guess in an ideal world, the support wouldn't even be necessary, right? Your role wouldn't even be necessary, because the scandal would have and should have, of course, never happened in the first place. And I wonder, aside from the things that we've already discussed, access to legal aid, trauma-informed reforms, partial payments, what other structural reforms do you think need to be put in place to ensure that, there isn't a need for your position in 20 or 30 years' time?
So I think it's really important to say and to convey as well the actual scale of the Home Office Windrush scandal, in that not only does it affect, and we've seen this from when it originally broke into the public consciousness in 2018, not only did it affect and is still affecting, because I want to say this as well, definitely, that this is still a live issue. This is unfinished injustice. And that's why my role exists. And until that is sorted, then I'll be the first one to step away from the role, So, and I say this because I think we've limited the scale of what has happened here. This is, as my friend told me when I first came to this work in terms of the immigration advisor, started off as undocumented Commonwealth citizens. So who are we talking about? We're talking about, that could be anyone from the Caribbean, it could be anyone from parts of India, Pakistan. It's also people from Ghana, Kenya, Nairobi, So it's undocumented potentially from any Commonwealth country. One of the first people that we helped, I want to get it out there, was a white Canadian male.
Wow.
and we got his status sorted out, and we helped him to get multiple pounds worth of compensation. And you know why we could do that? Because he fell into the category. And not only is it concerning Commonwealth citizens, but we now know from before the 31st of December 1988, if you were lawfully settled in the country and you had problems proving your lawful status, you potentially could also get your status sorted out and also make a claim for compensation. So it's really important. So I think the scale of it requires a response to understand that it's affect people. And also it's important to understand that, going back to your question, the broader scale, how is the Home Office responding to the broader changes that's required in terms of treating people in a way that is humane, in a way that is respecting people, that they have a right to be in the country, and doing that in a way which I guess makes Britain what it sets out itself to be a proud nation.
Mm-hmm. That's also a really interesting response. And I think you've touched on quite a few points that I know for a fact our audiences will be super intrigued by. So just to go back to that question, I want to push a little bit harder on that with structural reform. So obviously in an ideal world, the scandal wouldn't have happened. The scale of the scandal is obviously huge, and we're all clear because most of our audiences are from Caribbean backgrounds. So we know firsthand the scale of this issue. And I wonder, what I'm sure we all don't want to see is this to be, for your position to have been created, but there not to be fundamental change that affects people's lives. No one wants to see that, including yourself, I assume.
Yeah.
And I wonder whether there is anything in particular, aside from the 3 reforms that we've mentioned, that you're advocating for to ensure that this tangible systemic change is actually felt on the ground, to ensure that your role isn't needed in maybe 200 years' time going forward.
Yes, yeah. So I think it's important. I always use this phrase that social justice and change is hard work, but it's necessary work. Mm-hmm. And systemic change, and I think you've rightly talked about this. Mm-hmm. What does that look like and mean like? Yeah. So for me, let's just stick with the Windrush Lessons Learnt review. Mm-hmm. As a result of the Windrush Scandal breaking, the then Home Secretary, Sajid Javid, said to Wendy Williams, look at why this happened in the Home Office, and give me some understanding what needs to happen so that it never happens again.
Exactly, yeah.
So as a result of that, Wendy Williams did a superb report, the Windrush Lessons Learnt review. And if you don't know anything about the Windrush Scandal, read that report. And it's fantastic. Some of the case studies there and the recommendations. In fact, in some way, even my role potentially has come out
of that report. Yeah, I think a lot of us probably would say that. Yeah,
exactly. So, and that addresses the point that you're making in terms of those systemic changes. Mm-hmm. What needs to be done? So a lot of things that need to be done, and I'm talking in a broad sense here. Yeah. How are we looking at the governance with regards to managing people who have the legal and the moral right to be here? Yeah. What is the culture of our response to people who may find themselves in a situation where, quite frankly, they can't prove the documentation? They don't have it. How are we going to respond to that? So I think that those recommendations are a massive, because that's one of my roles as well, is to advise the government on the Home Office on how it is responding to that, because I think that speaks to a mechanism and a framework for addressing the injustices on a bigger scale and the systemic scale as well.
And I know that you obviously mentioned just now that one of the first people that you helped was a white Canadian male, you said, right? Yeah. So I think a lot of people won't be aware of the fact that your remit also includes broader marginalized communities as well. Like aside from the first case that you've just referenced, but in general, that's part of your remit is broader marginalised communities. How do you plan on advocating for those communities, and what does a more just framework actually look like in practice for you?
Yeah, that's a brilliant question, and it's actually one of my priorities, and it's based on going back to the Windrush Lessons Learnt Review Recommendation 5. That talks about, Wendy Williams spoke about that the Home Office has a responsibility to engagement. What I liked about that report, it puts a big emphasis on being proactive and engaging with those affected communities. Recommendation 5 talks about specifically being proactive to other communities outside of the Caribbean. So from Africa, from South Asia, and doing that work. So I've made this also a feature in terms of talking to Home Office officials and the minister that, you know, what does that look like? So there are elements, yes, where we can have funding, but how are we building the capacity to support those communities?
Exactly, yeah.
Because someone rightly says to me, just at the weekend, a young African lady I was speaking to, she says, Clive, I'm not connected to probably some an organization, but I tell you what, Clive, I know my community and I know how to reach them and how to engage with them. And so we've got to be looking now at more creative ways of getting people who can communicate the message, get involved and bring awareness to the potential possibility of getting your status sorted out through the scheme or accessing the compensation.
And I'm also just thinking, for those who are watching this, who are thinking, how is it that one of the first people that you helped was, you know, from a white Canadian background? Hasn't your role been established to specifically support those from Black Caribbean communities who have, you know, been traumatized and affected by the Windrush, by the Home Office scandal, let me call it actually?
Yeah.
How can that end up occurring in practice? And why is it not specifically focused on Black Caribbean communities?
So it's really important that we understand what I've said and what I've not said. The scandal broke and it majority affected people from the Caribbean. We saw that in the beginning. So that's why it's called the Windrush Scandal, because it was people who look like me and you, like, you know, a lot of people who've been listening to this were affected. So we've helped them, we've supported them. I'm saying as my role as the commissioner, and just bringing to the attention that there are other communities as well who are affected. But believe you me, we need to recognize that those people who were firstly affected and recognize who need that help, get the help. So it's really important that we do that, because I don't want it to be sounding like we're not focusing on the people who need the help, if that makes sense.
And of course not. I think more so my question is for people that don't understand why your remit also includes broader marginalised communities. Can you explain a little bit as to why your remit is wider than just specifically the Caribbean community?
Well, in a nutshell, that's to do with immigration law.
Okay.
That's to do with immigration law. It affects who it affects because of from the 1948 Immigration Act, the 1971 Act. And so the reason why it is broader is because it is the law, and as a citizen. And so if you have come from anywhere, you know, before 1973 into the country, and you come lawfully, you had the right to be here, and you didn't have the paperwork, you can access it through the scheme if you've come from anywhere, from even from around the world. And so the reason why that is simply because of law, you know, and the law is for everyone. And so once you start to unpick that, you get a sense of what I was saying earlier. Well, hang on, this affects, when I'm seeing on the TV, it's just people from the Caribbean I keep seeing. You know, once I unpick it, it is. And then for me personally, as a person who was an advocate at the beginning, I have an experience of someone who was outside of the Black Caribbean and had an issue which was exactly the same.
Right, okay. I think that would be useful for our audiences to understand a little bit more about why your remit is wider than what is also commonly perceived quite often. Is there anything that surprised you since being in the role?
Well, I've only been in the role a few months.
Exactly, yeah.
So I'm still kind of in some ways finding out about things. I do have to say something that I wasn't prepared for was the online discourse, the social media discourse, and sometimes what that was. And sometimes some of it is very personal, very hateful. So I wasn't really prepared for that. And that's been a bit of a learning for me. So there's that element, which I've had to sort of, adapt to, get support with, and talk to the right people with as well. But on the whole, it's been a bit of a roller coaster and doing some really exciting things like appearing on the platform today. So I'll tell you now. So those are things I'm getting used to.
Fantastic. And is there anything that you wish you had done differently so far?
Well, yes. I mean, I guess it would have been always great to have a bit more lead time to create a team. So we're still building a team, which I'm really excited with. I've got a great team already, which is doing fantastic work, and so it's all about getting yourself prepared. And so I guess just being in a bit more of a coming into more of a more people in terms of support would have been nice. But we are where we are, and we're making progress in that as we speak.
And before I move on to my last question, obviously this is going to be going out on a social media platform, on our platforms. And I wondered if there's anything else that you wanted to touch on about the response that you've had on social media.
So, well, social media is important. I think it's a good thing. And like with anything, it's how you use it. I think there is a real opportunity for young people to help, and particularly within the Black community, to get the message out that the Home Office Windrush scandal is still unfinished injustice. I think the skill, the talent, the ingenuity to sort of get that message through social media is going to be vitally important. Please don't dismiss older people. They also use social media. So I think the nice ways that young people can use this technology, breathe life into what some of the issues are. As the Home Office Commissioner, I would love to be working with our own communities to be doing that. And I think that's something that I would like to sort of push forward really with regards to the use of social media.
And I guess my last question is, what do you want your legacy as the first Windrush Commissioner to be? Quite a hard question, I know, but if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, it is a hard question. Well, for me, I would like to get a sense that there has been justice, that there's been healing, that there's been some reconciliation, and that there is a more of a respect for the extraordinary legacy and contribution, of the. Let me talk about the Windrush generation now, and kind of categorize that as the Caribbean, because I know the term Windrush kind of it can be very loose in terms of a Home Office victim, but for me, success would look like that there is justice for anyone.
Could you tell us a little bit more about what the Windrush Scandal is, why the compensation scheme was created, and what that essentially means in practice for our audiences?
Yeah, so there were people who had the lawful and legal right to be in the UK as British citizens, found themselves, unfortunately, caught up in a situation where they were treated as illegal immigrants. This came about as lots of changes of policy, hostile environment. And as a result of that, sadly, we had a number of people who were wrongly deported, wrongly detained, and were denied access to services. When this actually came into the public consciousness from 2017 to 2018, the government recognised that a wrong had been done, and it set up a number of things to correct that. This was actually affecting particularly people from the Caribbean and mainly people from the Commonwealth. So the government set up a number of things to correct that. One of the two things that they did were the actual compensation scheme, the Windrush compensation scheme. But first of all, they set up the Windrush Task Force, which was a means to correct your documents, because the problem that people had is that they came over legally, didn't have any paperwork, and then they could not prove their right through the paperwork. So the Windrush Task Force, Windrush scheme was set up that they could have free access to get the right paperwork. And then back in 2019, the government set up the Windrush Compensation Scheme.
Amazing, thank you. And so on behalf of Enact Equality and Black Things UK, I just want to say thank you so much for joining me for this conversation and sharing more about your perspective as the UK's first Windrush Commissioner. So thank you.
Thank you very much.